Rebel force has penetrated the shield and landed on Endor.
This is where the fun begins.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
This is Rebel Force Radio.
Your source for the Force.
Star Wars news and commentary.
With Jason Swank and Jimmy Mack.
I've seen Star Wars 500 times.
Star Wars #1!
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Now it's time for Rebel Force Radio.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Well, of course, as everybody is counting down to the holidays, we here at Rebel Force Radio and throughout the greater Star Wars fan community are counting down the days, just a couple of weeks now, until the premiere of Skeleton Crew. Yeah, and of course, if you're a listener of Rebel Force Radio, you know that a new Disney Plus Star Wars series means one thing. Not just weekly entries into Star Wars canon and storytelling, but of course the Rebel Force Radio after shows. Yeah. You think, we're not going to let some silly old holidays derail us of that tradition. No way. No, we're going to be here each and every week as there is a new episode of Skeleton Crew that will drop beginning on December 3rd. That's when the shows will drop, and then we will follow up with the after shows the next day. So looking forward to all of that. And there is something, ever since the Force Awakens, there has been sort of, for a lot of fans, there's been sort of a match made between the holiday season and Star Wars. For me, it's always been that time of year when it starts to get a little warmer after the cold, long winter. That's when I start getting that itch, because that was sort of, between the original trilogy and the sequel, or the prequel trilogy. That's when I started really feeling it gets Star Warsy. But I do know there's a lot of fans out there that love this holiday time of year. So great to have a new drop. Of course, with a new Star Wars Disney Plus series, that means that we've got more interviews and more news to go through. So we will be checking in with this Skeleton Crew Directors Roundtable. We'll bring you some highlights from that, as well as just sort of catching up on some news of late. We've got interview highlights with Ewan McGregor, Daisy Ridley, and even Francis Ford Coppola, reflecting back on first time he ever saw Star Wars. And speaking of Disney Plus, if you haven't caught it yet, do check out, I've watched part of it, not the whole thing, the fantastic documentary on John Williams, music by John Williams. That's a special about the maestro, probably the most influential film composer ever, really, John Williams. So we've got some highlights from that. If we have time, we'll get into Star Wars and pop culture. But if you're new to the program and introductions may be in order, my name is Jason, and with me, as always, my good friend and yours from Chicago, Jimmy Mack.
Hey, Jason. Hey, Star Wars fans. Glad to be back for another round of The Wars. Conversational style. Yes, with my good friend Jason Swank, who's always the best to talk to Star Wars about. As a matter of fact, we were rapping about Star Wars even before we started the show. So this is almost like second show for us. And we promise, we warmed up. This will be better than what we were talking about before the show. But I want to talk about something that happened before the show and get some closure on something we talked about last week, courtesy of a voicemail from loyal RFR listener Nathan. And Nathan asked us a question about Attack of the Clones and the moment Yoda was sensing the presence of Qui-Gon Jinn. At the same moment, Anakin Skywalker was killing a bunch of Tuskens in cold blood. So let's jump back to our voicemail from last week and hear what Nathan had to say.
When Anakin saves his mother and then she dies and he kills all the Tusken Raiders, there's a bit where it cuts to Yoda meditating and you hear Qui-Gon's voice going, Anakin, Anakin, no! At this point, the camera's on Yoda, so I wonder, who is hearing that voice? Is Yoda hearing Qui-Gon through the Force? Or is that Qui-Gon speaking to Anakin as he's, going to slaughter the Tusken Raiders? Or is it from the audience perspective that only we can hear Qui-Gon calling out through the Force and Yoda can't communicate with him yet?
I've been giving this a lot of thought. I had my answer, but it's been weighing on me because I feel like there's got to be a canonical answer on this.
The thing that drives me the craziest about this whole situation is it's clearly not Liam Neeson saying no.
That's the biggest sin. That's the biggest crime in all this.
I mean, George Lucas just had the biggest set of cojones to pull this off, to play the audio, Jason.
Anakin! No!
I mean, George had such a set to play this in the film and think we wouldn't notice. That is clearly not Liam Neeson. Anakin, no! I love it.
Even you sound more like Liam Neeson with your no, and you're trying not to sound like him in that.
Oh yeah, sure, you know. Okay.
That's what they could have done. They could have taken something like that. I mean, look, they got Obi-Wan Kenobi to say, or, Alec Guinness to say Rey by cutting up the dialogue. Are you telling me that there's no prior recordings of Liam Neeson saying anything? Like, no? It's a pretty common word.
They just could have had him do it over the phone or something. That would have been closer to reality than the one we get in the final product.
Well, that wasn't when he got into that motorcycle accident, was it?
No. No, that actually that interfered with, from what we understand, that interfered with him appearing in Revenge of the Sith. So that would have been several years later.
Okay, all right.
But so I did some digging, and I figured I'd go to the novelization first.
Yeah.
So we have a segment here from Chapter 20 of the Attack of the Clones audiobook. This is narrated by Jonathan Davis. And this is from the novelization, the very moment when Yoda was meditating right before Mace walked in. And by the way, props to Sam Jackson for the cool way he swung around to sit on that little stool there. That was like the coolest swing around to sit there and talk to a puppet that I think any actor could have achieved. But I'm getting distracted. This is from the audiobook as Yoda was meditating.
Deep in his meditations, peering through the dark side, Master Yoda felt a sudden surge of anger, of outrage beyond control. Deep in his meditations, peering through the dark side, Master Yoda felt a sudden surge of anger, of outrage beyond control. The diminutive master's eyes popped open wide at the overwhelming strength of that rage. And then he heard a voice, a familiar voice, crying, "No, no, Anakin, no, don't, no!" It was Qui-Gon. Yoda knew that it was Qui-Gon, but Qui-Gon was dead, had become one with the Force. One could not retain consciousness and sense of self in that state. One could not speak from beyond the grave. But Yoda had heard the ghostly call, and in his deep meditative state, his thoughts focused as precisely as they had ever been. The Jedi Master knew that he had not been mistaken. He wanted to focus on that then, perhaps to try to follow that call back to the ghostly source, but he could not.
Okay. All right.
So it's left kind of open to interpretation right there.
Yeah.
A good bit. I mean, so what we do know, though, is Yoda believes he heard the voice of Qui-Gon.
Yes.
But he's not really sure if...
He's doubting it.
It was maybe just maybe his mind playing tricks, or it could have been the wind chimes outside the Jedi Temple. Who knows? What I noticed differently, though, about the novelization compared to the final film is what Qui-Gon is saying in that Force audio experience where he doesn't say, Anakin, no. He says, no, Anakin, no, don't, no. So I tried to make it more like the film. Jonathan Davis, I don't think had seen the film by the time he was recording this. Otherwise,
probably not.
More authentic in his read. But so the novelization leaves it open to interpretation, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm starting to believe here in this is that, and I'm not going to bring up the worlds thing with the world between worlds and all of that. But I do what I think that is it can be a metaphor for this idea that everything within the Force is connected. Everything's connected within the Force. And so if you think of it like, the highway system, you got big long stretches of highways and they branch off and they do all this. Well, that's all sort of like feeding back into and sort of in some ways, I think, making up the Force itself. And in the Davis, there wasn't any evidence to suggest that Yoda was specifically thinking of Anakin, because he had sent Anakin on this mission. So was he specifically trying to reach out to Anakin, or was he just meditating and this happened to be the loudest station on the dial because Anakin was utilizing so much Force, well, really dark side of the Force, so much hate? That's the one thing that I'm kind of struggling with. Once you figure that out, it doesn't really. It's like you got Qui-Gon inside the Force, looking outward into the physical universe, keeping an eye on Anakin, and then you got Yoda from the outside peering inside. It's like they're kind of meeting in the middle. Now I'm conjuring up Whoopi Goldberg and Patrick Swayze meeting together in Ghost. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but somehow they're finding one another inadvertently. But whether or not Yoda was kind of keeping tabs on Anakin, or it just happened to be that was such a vergence, I guess we could say, in the Force. Maybe vergence isn't the right word, but it was a big moment within the Force.
It was like a seismic shift.
The
Force, in the actual balance of the Force itself.
Yeah.
And if you want to think about tuning into, I like how you put it, the loudest station on the dial.
Yeah.
What if Yoda was like tuning around and so he tunes in like a Polish polka or something? He's like, no, I'm trying to be real here. And he's just getting nothing but polka music.
Yeah, or it's Kiadi Mundi dropping a deuce in the bathroom down the hall. Like
or the pain of Yarl Poof bumping his head in the doorway yet again. Oh, I need something that I can sink my teeth into here. But it's the Force that controls all of this. And I'll tell you why I know. This is because we've seen it happen a few times when there are moments of mass destruction and many lives get lost, like the destruction of Alderaan. All of a sudden, Obi-Wan, he's trying to train the kid, and he has to sit down. He gets all woozy, like, oh, man. And he's not even trying to reach out necessarily to Alderaan at that moment. It's just, like you said, the loudest station on the dial. And that's what happened here with Yoda. And the fact that Yoda is personally connected to Anakin Skywalker makes it more intense, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Yeah, but it's fun to break it all down. Now that we've done that, let's figure out what it really is. Courtesy of the maker himself, George Lucas. George does address this on the Attack of the Clones commentary track.
We cut to Yoda, who is meditating, who hears this off screen, and we do hear a voice in there, and that voice is the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn.
Anakin! No!
So we very subtly establish that in this rather intense emotional connection that Yoda is feeling the pain and suffering of Anakin and the Tusken Raiders, he's also making a connection unwittingly with Qui-Gon Jinn. And up to this point, we haven't really established that you can make a connection with the departed in this world. And that will become a factor in the next one. Lots of issues sort of come out of that, but this is the very beginning of that Yoda making a connection with Qui-Gon Jinn in the middle of Anakin's pain.
Promises made, promises not kept, eh, George? In fact, they don't really deal with it at all in the theatrical release, certainly, of Revenge of the Sith. It was one of those plot points that just, I think George just ran out of time.
Yeah. Outside of Yoda, Yoda figures it out, and he deals with it, but we as an audience aren't privy to all of that.
No.
Teach you how to communicate with them, I will. Yes. It's like, well, wait a second. That's a pretty important thing. We've been thinking about this really since Luke Skywalker was making the trench run on the Death Star in the original film, and he heard the voice of Obi-Wan. And then the 6 films come and go, and it really doesn't get addressed. And that's a bummer.
It is a bummer.
That's a real loose end. That's a real loose end. Now, granted, of course, they did attack it a little bit in the Clone Wars, in the animated show, in the 6th season. But still, it's not as much like spelling out. I want to know exactly how.
Yeah.
I want to know how. And it's just the only thing is that I think canonically we've been led to believe that it is some shaman who taught Qui-Gon how to achieve life after death. And he studied under this guy, this unknown shaman. And that's a story yet to have been told as well.
I was thinking about this idea of, multiple people reaching out at the same time. And I'm thinking about Empire Strikes Back when Luke is hanging upside down in Cloud City. And Leia is reaching out. He reaches out to Leia. They establish a connection. And what if Vader got involved in that? Because Vader right after starts reaching out to Luke. Like I was thinking about this. Like, does this mean you can have like 3-way calling? Is that's essentially what Yoda, Anakin, and Qui-Gon had? And so Leia's reaching out to Luke, and she hears Vader's voice. Like that would be wild.
Yeah. It's like a party line gone totally awry. But it would be funny, too, because Luke, he says, son, father, son. And then Leia gets on, daughter. What? No, son. Wait.
Credits.
Father, daughter, son. Yeah, right. And, what? Yeah, the last word we hear in Empire Strikes Back is, what?
Dun, 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 dun. Well, that's definitely an interesting one. I mean, I don't think that what George says necessarily upsets, my apple cart. I think that it's obvious what its purpose was, and George does a great job of describing, sort of the shorthand of what he was accomplishing there. But then there's all this extrapolations that we as fans want to take out of it. Well, what does that actually mean? And but I think at the end of the day, I take that as the moment when Yoda first got the notion, and maybe it was something he had read about in ancient texts, that there was a belief that this was possible, but I like to think that he didn't believe it was possible until then. That's when he realized that there might be something to this, and then off screen, he's working on it, trying to create a connection, and by the time we get to the end of Revenge of the Sith, he's established that connection with Qui-Gon.
Yeah, it's almost like being proved something from your faith is 100% legitimate, and
right.
you've experienced it. It could be something along those lines.
That's a great question. Thank you, Nathan, for that. It
is a great question, and the answer is that according to George Lucas, that was Yoda hearing the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yes.
So that's that.
Right.
And it wasn't used as a sort of a device for us as an audience or anything like that. Ultimately it was, but
sure, everything is, but it wasn't
in a very subtle way.
It was literal. He was literally hearing the voice of Qui-Gon. It wasn't any kind of abstract thing at all. It was literal. Wow, boy, Nathan hit it out of the park with that question. Why don't we see what's next here in listener mail? Sure, everything is, but it wasn't. It it was literal. He was literally hearing the voice of Qui-Gon. It wasn't any kind of abstract thing at all. It was literal. Wow, boy, Nathan hit it out of the park with that question. Why don't we see what's next here in listener mail?
You must contact me. Play back the entire message.
What message? Message after the message.
The Emperor commands you to make contact with him. It's a trick. Send no reply.
Hey, Jason and Jimmy, this is Paul V. from Phoenix. I just wanted to chime in as we're heading into Skeleton Crew. First, I want to say I'm excited for the show, and I think it's going to be fun, but just as how I was concerned with how the unwashed masses were going to receive Ahsoka, I find myself with another concern as we're going into Skeleton Crew, and that's that I'm concerned with the methodology that they used when they created the show. And the Huttese cover of Major Tom that we just got in the latest trailer is the perfect example of what I mean, in that it seems that when they were making the show, they were asking the question, how do I make X Star Wars? Instead of asking, how do I make the Star Wars version of X? And that's a very important distinction. And it's something that I believe Nilo Rodis Jamero has spoken about before, in that whenever you're designing something for Star Wars has to be the base that you start from. It has to be grounded in that Star Wars aesthetic from the beginning. Otherwise, you end up with something that feels like it's from Earth, just with some Star Wars greeblies glued onto it. And I think Skeleton Crew has that problem where you look at planet Suburbia, it looks like a town in, California. It doesn't look like the Star Wars version of Suburbia. And that's the same issue they seem to have with their pirates, whereas, traditionally you have characters like Han Solo or Hondo Ohnaka, as compared to the scurvy dogs that they have in Skeleton Crew, who are literally, using flintlock pistols, which presumably shoot blaster bolts. It doesn't work. It feels like Earth. And that's my concern as we head into the series, that the majority of it is going to have that kind of feel to it. And hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully what we see as they get it into the galaxy at large is the Star Wars aesthetic that we all know and love, and not something that feels more earthbound than it does Star Wars.
Yes. This is, something I don't blame Paul at all for having these concerns. We've covered, Jim, a lot of Star Wars creatives who say that what they're really trying to do is sort of deconstruct the elements that made Star Wars, the things that George was interested in, samurai, westerns, things like that. But if they lean too heavily into one, then it's like, yeah, you've created a great kind of Western story, but what about Star Wars? Star Wars is its own thing. I will say that I feel like this is all too obvious to the creatives. Like it cannot be a mistake that they've made this planet that the kids are from look very Earth-like. It has to figure in to the story, because it's otherwise there's just it looks like blind. I'm using this as a metaphor when I say blind, but someone who's blind trying to create Star Wars. It's so obvious. So I have to think that there's a reason that it feels Earth-like. There's a reason why it feels detached and separated from the greater galaxy far, far away. And the story that we covered last week that said that the interview that was posted on StarWars.com, where they were saying that it's an unknown planet, no one's ever heard of it within the Star Wars galaxy. They pulled that from the interview because it was revealing too much of a clue. I feel like that's all starting to line up with why this planet does not fit in with what we know Star Wars planets to typically look like.
Right. I do think there's a method to this particular madness when you talk about Skeleton Crew and the suburban planet. And I think we have some clips coming up from the Directors Roundtable that might shed a little bit of light on this. without spoiling anything, really.
Yeah.
But as far as the pirates using like flint pistols and things like that, I'm kind of forgiving about that. If they have pirate tropes attached to them, I mean, our caller used Hondo Onaka as an example, and that guy was flooded with pirate tropes, if you ask me.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, instead of having a parrot on his shoulder, he had one of those Salacious Crumb guys, Kawakian monkey lizards.
Yeah, he was.
So there were little things like that kind of peppered his whole routine. Even some of his wardrobe, especially when he was first introduced, had lots of pirate vibes that you can say come from real world stuff.
I don't remember saying a vast. Do you ever remember the vast slipping through? We saw that in Mandalorian.
Yeah, that might be going a bit too far. Be a little bit on the nose, if you will. Yeah. But the thing about tapping the influences George Lucas was tapping into, I do think is being taken a little bit too far. I think a lot of it comes from Dave Filoni, based on the discussions he had with George Lucas, where he determined that he needed to take the same approach as George. But I don't think that that's the right approach. I think it's kind of flawed. And I feel that way because George was using all of these different influences, throwing them into a melting pot to create Star Wars. Once Star Wars was created, do you think George kept going back to the well to mine old Westerns? And he may have here and there, but it wasn't the prime influence. And by that point, he had cracked the code for Star Wars. The creation was created. And by doing so, there were certain rules that even things like Kurosawa films and Westerns from the 50s and 60s could violate if taken too far. Yeah. And now all Lucasfilm wants to do is lean on the influences more than Star Wars itself. And they've been doing this for a number of years. I think that's a flawed approach. I think they should really use Star Wars as their absolute baseline. And then if you want to throw in little influences here and there. But it shouldn't be the rule. It should just kind of happen, maybe in a more organic way. Now, these guys clearly want to make a pirate Star Wars show. So they're looking at old pirate films. And that's fine for research. Right. But you can't cross that line too far. Nor can you say, well, this Kurosawa film is a Star Wars film because George Lucas was influenced by Kurosawa films. The math is wrong there.
Yeah.
Everything should equal Star Wars. And another example, I think, of where the approach gets flawed is apparently Leslie Headland turned in a first draft of The Acolyte that was really solid Star Wars. But then Kathy Kennedy sent her home for a second draft saying, you made a great Star Wars show, now make it a Leslie Headland show. And that's when the wheels came off the whole train.
Yeah, you wonder if even Leslie Headland herself, Jim, knew that was, that was her mandate. That was her job, was to write a great Star Wars show. And then it's like, no, there's not enough of you in it. I want to watch this show, or I want to read this script, and I want to hear you, Leslie Headland. Who thinks like that with an established franchise and universe that's nearly 50 years old? Like, who thinks like that?
That's it. There's a lane that they need to stay in, and they swerve outside of it all the time. And each new project is different from the last. I think that lack of consistency also hurts Star Wars, and why things are kind of on a down slope right now. Yeah. Come on, Skeleton Crew. As I was saying to Jason before the show, it's like Star Wars really needs a life preserver at this point. We need it as a fan base, and the Disney company needs it to keep Star Wars relevant, because I fear it's slipping into irrelevance. And God, I hate saying that on a Star Wars podcast, but it's true. So I think the focus really needs to be more on Star Wars itself than all of these wacky influences and things like that. Let the influences fit into Star Wars as opposed to making Star Wars fit the influences.
What I'm really hoping for is that these kids and all of the people from this planet where the kids are from, the parents and all of that, end up being some kind of I think I mentioned this on the last show, like some kind of an avatar for us in our own galaxy, so that we're going to see this crazy galaxy far, far away through the eyes of these kids that will, in some ways, I think, harken back to how we felt when we were 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, seeing our first Star Wars movie, whether it was A New Hope, like in Jim's case, Return of the Jedi for me, for others, it might have been The Phantom Menace. Like, these kids might be this sort of proxy for how we felt. And we will maybe re-experience the wonder and the excitement through them. That's what I'm really hoping this is about.
Fingers crossed. Well, like I said, we have some clips coming up here in news that will shine a little bit more light on some of the things we've been talking about and get us good and primed for the premiere of Skeleton Crew in a couple of weeks.
Sure do.
Rebel Force Radio.
Let's get right to it. Let's go to the news.
I have good news for you, my lord.
That's good news. Come closer, I have good news.
All right. Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call this good news, but it's news nonetheless. I know a lot of people saw the headlines that the Rey movie, well, I shouldn't say the Rey movie. Let's be fair. Disney has basically removed one of their 3 release dates that they touted. Jim, if you remember, these were the dates: May 22nd, 2026, December 18th, 2026, December 17th, 2027. These were the dates that Lucasfilm announced as being release dates for future Star Wars movies, despite the fact that none of these dates had any kind of officially assigned movie to go along with them. Of course, we speculated what might fit into each slot, but I guess it's as official as it's going to be that Disney has removed the untitled Star Wars film previously scheduled for December 18th, 2026. So the middle date here, if you're watching the show, we've got a graphic up on the screen. That second date, December 18th, 2026, now off the table for a Star Wars release. Instead, Ice Age 6 coming to a theater near you. Going to be rivaling, the slasher franchises and the James Bond franchise for the most films. Ice Age 6. Dang.
And Rocky. Don't forget Rocky.
Oh, yeah, Rocky, yeah. But so this
that was always the joke, as far as like the one that has the most Roman numerals after it. It was Rocky. It was by now we were supposed to have seen Rocky 23 or Rocky XXIII. Yeah, we should have been seeing that by now, but who knows?
So, Jim, not a huge surprise based on recent news. The Rey film. Now, the May 22, 2026, again, not official, but most people look at that and say that's the Grogu Mandalorian movie. That's the release date. It's on track to hit there. No questions there. That December 18th was considered to be the Charmaine Obaid-Chinoy Rey film. And then in 2026, and then December 17th, up for grabs, but most thought it was going to be the Mangold Dawn of the Jedi film. So how does this falling domino of December 18th, 2026 taken out of play? What does it mean? What do you think it means for how these films are going to play out?
Well, I think it's largely good news. I really do. Even though, once again, Lucasfilm and Kathy Kennedy have eggs on their face. And so does the Disney company. But they're the dummies who keep announcing release dates for films that are like barely off the ground at all, as far as concepts, as far as personnel, as far as ideas. I mean, They're nothing. The Disney company is doing the same thing they did the day George Lucas signed off on the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney. They're announcing films, 3 of them at a time, that have nothing going on. They think they can just slap Star Wars on anything, and it'll be good to go. Well, it's a lot harder to get this stuff off the ground than anyone ever imagined post-George Lucas. There are probably anywhere from a dozen to 15 films currently in some level of development at Lucasfilm, with fingers crossed that one of them will eventually go in front of cameras. It's craziness.
We talked about it last week, Jim, like it was a horse race. All of a sudden, it's like, well, we've got Simon Kinberg's trilogy. It might involve Rey, so he's off trying to write it faster than whoever was replacing Stephen Knight for the Obaid Chinoy Rey film. It's like they're playing these creatives off of each other. Like, what kind of creative environment is this?
It sounds like a very dysfunctional scene. And to make things even worse, the May 22, 2026 film was supposed to be the Daisy Ridley, Charmin Obaid Chinoy film. And when Kathy Kennedy made that announcement of that film, April 2023, at Star Wars Celebration London, she fully intended on putting our butts in movie theaters on May 22nd, 2026 to see the Rey film.
Yeah.
The Rey film. But by the end of that year, by the end of 2023, the beginning of this year, 2024, it was very clear that the Rey film was not going to be ready by May 22nd, 2026. So they fast-tracked The Mandalorian and shifted gears from making it a streaming series facing season 4 to becoming a film franchise in itself. So The Mandalorian to the rescue. Jon Favreau to the rescue.
Once again.
I'll tell you what, Kathy Kennedy, you better not let Jon Favreau go because he's bailed you out a couple times now. He's bailed you out a couple times. And so naturally then we think, well, they just need a few more months to get that Rey film done, right? So that'll definitely be December 18th, 2026. And I believe that was the plan at the beginning of this year.
Yeah.
To fill theaters with fans to see the Rey film in December 2026, now that The Mandalorian has moved into May. Well, as we're approaching the end of this year, once again, no Rey film is going to be ready to get shot anytime soon. So they have to scratch that date. And it's a good thing they're doing that because when the Solo film came out, Bob Iger took a bullet and said he was putting too much pressure on Lucasfilm to create Star Wars. It was too much, too fast.
Yes.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So what happens then? They announced for 2026 2 films to drop. What happened to too much, too fast? It's good that they're going to take a year and a half between film releases, and maybe they can fill that December 17th, 2027 slot with something. Odds are it will be a Rey film of some sort, whether it be by Sean Levy or Charmin Obaid-Chinoy or
Jim,
Stephen Knight.
You and I both know it goes fast. The time goes fast. We're at the end of 2024. Meaning we're going to come into 2025 very, very soon. Before long, I mean, like, how long do they have? Because to our knowledge, there's no script for a Rey film. There's no Mangold script that we know of that's finalized. So how much, at what point are we going to just write off December 17th, 2027? How far into 2025 do we go before that starts looking unrealistic?
Well, now, as far as the Rey script goes, obviously there's something there because they have 2 different sets of writers working on them.
Yeah.
And so I think they just need to get it fine-tuned and sharpened up. And from what I understand, there is someone actually working on it right now. There has been a writer attached since Stephen Knight has left. It could be somebody like a Lawrence Kasdan. I'm led to believe it's someone who has some veteran status, but isn't considered like an all-time great or anything like that, which could be Lawrence Kasdan. Very well could be. Just as long as they keep his son Jonathan at home. Because Lucasfilm is still licking their wounds from Solo and his Willow show, which, John Kasdan wrote both of them. So if they bring him back, we're in big trouble.
Something
That's
else
all
that
I'm thinking.
This could be, though, Jim, is, what do we got? We got Mangold. It could be the Lando movie, that December 17th, 2027. I feel like that, as far as ease, because you don't have to get buried in lore and canon and all of that just to make a fun adventure with Lando. So that could be the one that they pull out. There's the Sean Levy, the Taika Waititi. And of course Simon Kinberg. Patty Jenkins. Yeah. My God, that you would think by now that Rogue Squadron film would be pretty well ironed out, at least as far as story goes. I would assume by the time you make a sizzle reel, you've got a pretty good script, and that could be it. I don't know. As much as I like to think that December 17th could be sort of the beginning of the next big chapter in the saga, some sort of Rey film, or maybe the beginning of the Simon Kinberg trilogy, I think they might call an audible, and it might be one of these kind of, I don't want to say lower tier, but you know what I'm trying to say.
A Lando film doesn't have to be a sprawling epic.
Right.
Of massive proportions with planets exploding and all of that. No, it's just going to be more of a character-driven film, I believe.
Yeah.
So that very well could be. They could start really ramping up production on that, should that be the case. From what we understand, James Mangold is going to be fully committed to his Star Wars project at the beginning of next year. So
that's the one I'm really hoping it is. I'm really hoping that 12/17/27 is the Mangold Dawn of the Jedi, because I have faith in Mangold, and I think that will be kind of it's a blank slate. It's the potential to be a blank slate, and what I like about it is it's not grabbing onto High Republic. It's not grabbing onto KOTOR. It's going before all of that.
Yes.
So we're all on the same page. We're all entering, from the same place.
Right on. But I can tell you, the priority in the hallways at Lucasfilm is whatever film they can whip up starring Daisy Ridley.
Yeah, you're probably
is
right.
Number one, top priority. That's the thing that's been talked about for the longest, and it's being talked about the loudest because Daisy Ridley put out about 50 films this year, and she's constantly being interviewed.
Right.
So they got to get
we
in
have some
front of
highlights
this.
here. More Daisy Ridley. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right. Boy, isn't that funny how these things work out? Well, Daisy appeared recently on BBC's The One Show. And I'm not really sure what she's promoting on this one, but she does respond to the recent news that a Star Wars trilogy from Simon Kinberg is on the way and may feature her character Rey.
The last time you were on, I did ask you about new Star Wars movies, right? You said that you were talking about one could be happening, didn't know too much about it, but now it's been announced. It's not one movie, it's going to be 3 movies.
Right.
What can you tell me?
Nothing. What I can tell you is what I told you last time.
Oh.
It's all very exciting.
You were 21, though, when you took on Star Wars. How do you approach the role now? Is it a bit different?
It's strange. The idea of it is quite different because I look back and think I was a child, and I don't entirely feel like an adult all the time, but I'm older now.
Yeah.
But also I've been away from it for a while, so to come back, it feels like something I know, but also something new. Mm-hmm. So I think it will feel very exciting and quite nerve-wracking.
Exciting and nerve-wracking. 2 emotions that I feel almost daily. I'm nerve-wracked and excited. Something that I picked up on, and maybe Daisy is just so used to this, Jim. she didn't even flinch when the interviewer threw that trilogy word at her.
Oh.
She didn't even flinch. And so it makes me, and I'm no body language expert, but I was really looking at it, and she doesn't flinch when they come back. And I don't know. To me, it seems like that's something that she was prepared, not necessarily to answer, because we know what the answer is always going to be, but prepared to hear, perhaps.
Maybe a producer said something to her like, well, they're going to ask you about the Star Wars thing, obviously. She's
right.
Like, that's fine. It's fine. I can do this. And so she handles it with that world-class smile of hers.
Oh, my gosh, those teeth.
But, they think she's being coy. They think she's biting her tongue, and she's not going to share, no matter. I think the truth of the matter is this. Daisy doesn't know at all what's going on with the Star Wars film.
No.
It's shifted gears so many different times and has gone through so many different hands. I think Daisy, and now Kinberg all of a sudden is in the mix, and a trilogy. She's not up to speed. She's signed on. She's on board. She wants to do it. And I really enjoyed what she said about having a different perspective. Think about it yourself. You're on a job. You'll leave the job for 5-6 years and you come back to it. How different is it going to be? How different is your approach going to be? How different is everyone going to treat you? It's exciting for her and nerve-wracking, as she says. And I love that. She always just seems so human to me, which I really appreciate. But I don't think she has a clue as to what's going to happen in these films. And
how could she when her
back.
bosses, when her very bosses don't have a clue? So it's like, how's Daisy supposed to know?
Get Simon Kinberg in here. Stat. We need someone who has a clue. So maybe Simon does. Fingers crossed he does, because greater man than he has tried. I'm looking at you, Guillermo del Toro. I'm looking at Damon Lindelof. I'm looking at all those guys. They all seem to be kind of on the same level as far as the playing field goes, with Guillermo del Toro obviously being a notch above, I think. But Colin Trevorrow, another guy, they all seem to be like kind of cut from the same mold. All of these people, they keep trying out for these Star Wars projects that don't work. Game of Thrones guys, the list goes on.
Lego
and on.
movie
J.D.
guys.
Dillard, J.D. Dillard, who I know nothing about at all. J.D. Dillard, but yeah, whatever his project was got scrapped. Justin Simeon bounced from the Lando project. Another guy. I mean, they're all just kind of mid-tier. Nothing really.
They're mid-tier, but they've had that one project that kind of brought them, brought attention to them.
Yeah, right.
And so they get picked for the major leagues, which I consider Star Wars the majors. And then they see them at practice, and it's like, maybe they're not measuring up. It's like, well, why didn't you go for an all-star from the beginning? That's what I don't get. They keep doubling down on these folks that, nothing against them. My God, I can't go make a Star Wars movie. So I've never directed any movie, but it just makes me wonder why they don't just go for the rock star, superstar, sure bet, sure thing from the get-go.
Right. And nobody is more unproven than Charmin Obaid Chinoy. I mean, no one is more unproven than her. She's never directed a Hollywood anything. Yeah. She's never worked in Hollywood before. Think about that for a second. Except for 2 episodes of the Ms. Marvel streaming show. Or do they call it Ms. Marvel? Or I don't know.
Lady Marvel.
Captain Marvel, Ms. Marvel.
Captain Marvel.
Mrs. Marvel. Captain Marvel. So she did 2 episodes of that show. That's not exactly like working your way up. She got fast-tracked into this Rey film, and nobody knows how. It's one of the great mysteries of modern-day Star Wars, is how did they find Charmin Obaid Chinoy, and how did she advance from 2 episodes of a Marvel streaming show into one of the biggest film franchises of all time that have millions, hundreds of millions of dollars riding on its performance. I don't want to be calling her Charmin Obaid Destroy after she's completely ruined Star Wars. I just don't even want to see her get her at bat. I really don't.
Yeah.
And I'm nervous about it. And I hope they move on from this crazy idea.
Every day that goes by, it looks more and more like that it's not going to happen for Charmin.
She's still in the mix.
Yeah, oh, sure.
So
She's
as far as we
definitely
know,
Right.
she's still very much in the mix.
But she's been so quiet lately.
Well, she made that big splash on New Year's Eve on CNN. That
So random.
Yeah. I mean, it was such a big splash that Star Wars fandom got flooded with insanity in the wake of that. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what Charmin Obaid Anoy can bring to the table.
Well, let's get into the lane of the Star Wars that we know is happening, we know is coming, and that's with this roundtable. Jim, I did not see this, so apparently this was posted on over at StarWars.com, this roundtable with directors, all of the directors of the Skeleton Crew, including John Watts, Chris Ford, Bryce Dallas Howard, David Lowery, and Jack Schreier.
Yes. Pretty entertaining, heavily edited, but it gives you a little bit of insight into these guys creatively. I don't really know much about John Watts and Chris Ford. I outside of the Spider-Man trilogy, I'm really not familiar with any of their works, nor am I familiar with anything about them behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever even seen John Watts until I watched this video, much less Chris Ford. Forget about it. So Bryce Dallas Howard was there, though. She was bringing a lot of good energy to the room. And the other two guys, David Lowery and Jake Schreier. Now, Jake Schreier and John Watts and Chris Ford, they all went to college together and studied film, along with Bryce Dallas Howard. They all have previous relationships.
Oh.
David Lowery is the odd man out. He kind of jokes about that a little bit. But, of course, they talk about a lot of the things we've been hearing about Skeleton Crew up to this point, most notably that Amblin influence. Why don't they just say it's influenced by the Goonies? Why do they say Amblin? Because that could really lead people to believe, like, oh, this is going to be like Schindler's List. I can't wait. It's going to be Schindler's List with kids.
Is in that Amblin family.
E.T., okay, fine, but that's only 2 films. Quite honestly, I don't think either of those films compare to the best kid adventure film from the 80s, and that's Stand By Me, which is the best.
I'm not going to argue with that. I love Stand By Me, even though they weren't the same, production company. And I kind of, growing up, I looked at Stand By Me and the Goonies. They're tonally very different, but it was like Stand By Me was sort of like Goonies in a way for like older kids. And so I love both of those movies very much. And but Stand By Me is an absolute classic.
And they're both connected by the greatness of one Corey Feldman.
Indeed, they are. That's right.
Yeah.
Who by the way, I don't know if you all know this, but Corey Feldman has had the most one of the most incredible and influential musical careers. It's very easy to overlook it, but do yourself a favor. I don't know if you've heard this. I am a sucker. I never get tired of Corey Feldman clips on Instagram. I never get tired. Love everyone.
They've gone from being cringy to being more cringy. I think that's the best way to chart his progress.
I love the current tack that he's taking, which is it was all a joke. You all fell for it. I'm Andy Kaufman.
Oh, sure he is. Yeah. All right, this conversation's over.
Anyway,
all right, let's hear what these directors. We're going to be hearing from John Watts and Jake Schreier as they discuss the Amblin influence on Skeleton Crew.
As a kid, I grew up in Colorado in the middle of nowhere, and we just go for walks out in these like fields with nothing around, and you're just hoping that you go on a kind of Amblin adventure. That's just what we grew up with, and that's the kind of adventure that we were always looking for as kids.
Yeah, there's that sense of wanting to go on an adventure as a kid, but I think any
anyone can remember that moment, like when you're a kid and you sort of expect that, like, maybe all adults will be safe and helpful, and then you realize that, like, adults are complicated and the world is not. And that's even in Goonies, you know, it's this, like, realization that adults don't always have your best interest at heart or want to do things. I just thought there was something really, really resonant about that.
And there's a really interesting tonal balance. Like, the thing that made those Amblin movies have that spirit was something that Kathy Kennedy would talk about. She would say they were grown-up films that just happened to star kids. So you'd make 4 10-year-old kids your main characters, but it's not a kid's show. It's not a kid's film. You're still making the stakes really real. You're still making it dangerous. You're combining that, you know, childlike sense of wonder with a real dangerous world and a Star Wars show that can sit next to all the other things in the Star Wars environment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just as nostalgic and just as in love with that whole vibe as they are. In fact, you know, my cousins and me, Jim, I don't know if you can, maybe you can relate to this as well. I mean, when we would all get together, we never thought about really watching TV together or anything like that. It was always, let's go and walk through the woods. Let's just follow the railroad tracks and see what happens. Where does it lead us? And we'd be gone for hours. I know younger kids today, they hear that and they think it's like when we heard our parents talk about walking to school uphill both ways and all of that. And to me, it's not a sacrifice. Those were some of the greatest memories of my life. And that's what we did as entertainment. And so I think that's obviously what they're trying to channel here was that spirit of being a kid in the 70s and 80s where you just kind of, when you stayed out until the streetlights came on, you know, basically. Or your mom would be screaming out the back door for you to come home, you know?
Yeah, or you were told just to come home when you see the streetlights come on.
Yeah.
There's a great meme on the Ultimate 80s page on Facebook. It's a picture of kids, a group of kids, obviously shot, say, circa 1976. And it says, your mom thought you were riding your bike around the block for 8 hours. But in that time, you went 5 miles away, explored an abandoned house, jumped over some garage roofs, attempted a Ouija board, built a den in the woods, and made your own fire. And that kind of sums up the Amblin adventure.
Every one of those as a kid. Every one of those. The abandoned house, the Ouija board, the whole bit. And it was amazing. So if this does, now let's bring it back to Star Wars in the current environment. If this does really lean into that, they could be really trying to make a play, Jim, for people our age, you know, people that kind of grew up in that. Although Stranger Things has sort of created an awareness to that era and that type of play, you might say, amongst kids, that it wouldn't be alienating. But the question I'm asking myself is this an effort to try and do something for Star Wars fans, the OGs, the original generation of Star Wars fans, perhaps?
Well, it sure sounds like it when John Watts is making the statement about Kathy Kennedy telling them that a film like Goonies was really a film for adults, just starring kids in it.
Yeah.
You know, it was like it's kids starring in an adult film. Well, that didn't sound right. Jeez.
A film for grown-ups, we'll say.
That sounded really, really incorrect.
Don't take that out of context, people, and post that online anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Everyone just heard, take that out of context, people, and post. But you know, it's that kind of thing that can appeal to all ages, and that's a good thing. And it has the thrills and adventure for a kid, and then it has enough stuff there that can connect to the kid inside the adult or the adult in general. And, you know, where you could look at that, oh, yeah, I remember doing stuff like that. But those little guys got, you know, in more trouble than I ever did because they took off into hyperspace. I mean, It can open up, like, dialogue between parents and children and stuff like that. But I think they're really shooting for that. They don't want this to be written off as a kid's show.
Right.
They definitely don't want that. So we have more from the round table. Jason, what do we got coming up here next?
Looks like we've got Kids Planet and speeder bikes.
Okay, so again, this is sort of goes back to our conversation that we were having via the Vmail from, I think it was Nate from earlier in the show.
Yeah.
His fears that maybe the environments are a little too earthbound. Maybe just the overall tone is a little too familiar to us as people living in the real world, watching this show, when we're really looking for escapism when it comes to Star Wars. I mean, we really don't want to see too many things that look like things that we see right outside our front door. But that suburban landscape sure feels like a suburban landscape.
It does. Got to think it's got to be there for a reason, you know?
It has to be there for a reason. So who are we hearing from in this clip? I think we're hearing from John
Ford. Chris Ford, I believe.
And Chris Ford, the two real showrunners of this shebang. So let's hear how they address both the realistic nature of the Kids Planet, the familiarity of the Kids Planet, and those speeder bikes they're riding around on that looked like, something that we would have been riding around on in the 80s, sans wheels.
Based on what the concept of the story was going to be, we knew they had to start in a more safe planet. It was an opportunity to, design a new thing. Like the kids' bikes was a really good place to start, because I think when you're designing a speeder bike, it looks really cool.
Yeah. Like, how do you make Wim's bike be kind of corny?
Like, come back, we need to bring in more Huffy, and...
Yeah, there's like little tassels on it.
We put tassels on it, and, there's tassels in space.
Are there tassels in space? These are the kinds of questions.
And that was the crazy thing.
You'd always call Dave Filoni and be like, are there tassels?
Yeah, can we do that? and the scariest thing he would say is, well, there are now.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Okay.
So that establishes something right there. No longer are we hearing, we asked Story Group, or we talked to Pablo Hidalgo.
Well,
they said, we talked to Dave Filoni. The thing we do when we ask these questions about, is there this in space in the case of these tassels? And I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I was really happy to not hear Story Group or Pablo Hidalgo. I'd rather hear, Dave Filoni. And of course, Dave, very patented Dave answer. Well, there are now. If you want to put tassels in Star Wars, go ahead. Little things like that don't bother me. I mean, when you think about the infinity of existence and creation and multiple universes and multiple galaxies, the fact that there might be patterns that establish themselves makes, to me, I've never really fought it that much. There's moments, though, when you say, yeah, this is too real. But seeing tassels on a speeder, like, Han had dice hanging from the Millennium Falcon, so,
Yeah, I just start thinking to myself, well, what sort of earthbound things do we really see in Star Wars? And you can look at something like a dewback and say, wow, that's a really exotic, crazy creature. It's a giant lizard. And they ride that giant lizard? Well, they do, but they have to put a saddle on it first. And that's kind of earthbound.
Saddles.
Earthbound creation, a saddle.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just seems so practical that the Star Wars universe should be above needing things to make things practical. You want to ride that thing, just jump on its back. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to have a saddle.
Right.
You want to fly that land speeder? Yeah, sure. It doesn't have wheels. It's a technology that's completely outside of the reach for modern society on planet Earth, but you still need a steering wheel to drive it. So there are these little things, little components that are familiar within Star Wars, connected to very unfamiliar things. So like a speeder bike that's basically a Huffy bike with no wheels. Well, they want to drive that home a little bit more and make it familiar to us. So they put tassels on the handlebars. Who's going to be upset about that? Wait. Paul Bateman's emailing right now.
We love you, Paul. We know what Paul wants is just a really good story. I think that's where he's at right now, like a lot of us.
Yeah,
And
Paul takes zippers and buttons, and shoelaces, whatever you got. Paul will take it as long as the story's good at this point.
Right. Then once the story's good, then he'll go in and he'll nitpick the, maybe some of the design work. But yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely what I'm getting from these folks is a lot of times, Jim, when you see creatives that are working on a new Star Wars thing, especially if they're outsiders, I'm not talking about necessarily Filoni and Favreau, but when you see them interviewed, you can almost feel the weight on their shoulders. Like sometimes you can just see that they understand there's this legacy, and oh, good God, these fans, and they're going to hate it, or they might love it, or they'll probably hate it. You can see the conflict and all that. With this group, I'm sensing kind of a lightheartedness, a lot of almost a sense of like they weren't getting fought very hard on various things, so maybe they had a lot of creative freedom. Just trying to pick up on just the overall vibe that I'm getting from them. There seems to be a sense of joy and maybe not taking it too terribly serious, which.
Well, not letting themselves get crushed under the weight of the whole thing. And
Yes,
I think that these guys are sort of they have good a good approach to all of this based on their experience in the Marvel universe with Spider-Man. Spider-Man's been around longer than Star Wars, so
absolutely,
and their fans are just as picky and demanding as Star Wars fans. So fandom of a long time will develop standards, and if Lucasfilm and Disney want to look at it as being a victim of their own success, then go ahead. But they got to embrace it. They have to embrace it.
Yeah.
So it seems like the creatives on this show are definitely embracing it as well. Of course, Bryce Dallas Howard. She has experience in Star Wars, and she also has experience as somebody who's in front of the camera too. So I think that gives her a good perspective. They're going to have the Daniels from Everything Everywhere All at Once, and those guys. They're in their own different universe. Forget the Star Wars universe. These guys are light years away from anything. So I think they handle it the way they handle things, and I don't think the executives at Lucasfilm are going to be giving these guys much interference unless they commit serious crimes. And we did hear of production difficulties with this show.
Yeah,
the show was supposed to drop about a year ago, but due to production difficulties, it was pushed back a full year to the end of 2024. So, Skeleton Crew, yeah.
I will say that I don't see near the promotional support for this as we saw with Acolyte. I mean, not even close.
No,
not even close. What we had a maybe a sizzle reel, a teaser trailer, and a regular trailer. I'm not seeing TV spots. We're 2 weeks out. There's no TV spots that I'm aware of hitting social. They're, considering that they just had a big D23 event in Brazil where really Andor seemed to have taken center stage. You didn't see a whole lot of anything for Skeleton Crew, really. You didn't see the cast making big rounds. Where are the kids? The kids I haven't seen them showing up on any talk shows yet.
And I was scouring all of the late night shows like the Tonight Show and Colbert and Kimmel, all of them, just to see if anyone's going to be popping in. And there was nothing on the schedule for this week on any of those shows. So maybe they're just sitting on it for the holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And you'll see a big promotional push when they know a lot of people are going to be in front of their televisions for things like football and Macy's parades and all of that stuff. So traditionally, I think Thanksgiving is a big TV weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And because you eat so much and all you can do is really just lay on the sofa and flip channels.
Right.
So
But do you take it, Jim, as just a thing about the time of year, the entertainment cycle where we're at, or do you think that it's showing some sort of lack of confidence in the show by Lucasfilm?
Well, maybe they're just trying to be a little careful about overhyping something.
Yeah.
Because when they do that, they get surprised by the backlash to the thing that they were overhyping. I'm looking at The Last Jedi, and I'm looking at The Acolyte specifically.
Yeah.
So maybe to avoid some backlash and to cut some costs, which we know have been crushing the Disney empire with all of their wasteful overspending on projects that never get made.
Yeah, maybe you gotta curtail the forward lash so you don't get as much backlash.
You sure know your lash, Swank. You sure know how that works. Skeleton Crew directors.
Yes, one more.
John Watts and Chris Ford. They talk about how this show is going to present us a different way of looking at the Star Wars universe through the eyes of the kids.
I'm excited for people to see Skeleton Crew because it's the same Star Wars universe that you know and you love. It's just a new perspective. The ability to see that world through the eyes of 4 10-year-old kids, I think, is a completely new way to enter this world that some of us know and love, some of us maybe haven't ever really experienced before.
Yeah, we were just drawn to that idea of these kids stumbling into the larger galaxy and not understanding it all. That was just natural to us, but it turned out that it's a great way for people who don't know the universe to get introduced to it because they're along with the kids. Or if you know all about it, you know all the things the kids are getting wrong and messing up, which is funny and tense.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to make something that works if you don't know anything about Star Wars and also works if you know everything about Star Wars.
Sounds like a bit of this sort of fish out of water story where these kids literally enter, some of the initial PR around this, or the story synopsis was that these kids get thrown into an unknown galaxy. We assumed that unknown galaxy was something alternate to the galaxy far, far away that we're used to. It seems like maybe that's not the case, that they are being thrown into what to them is an unknown galaxy, but very known to us as Star Wars fans.
Now, whether or not it's part of the Star Wars galaxy as we know it, or it's another galaxy like where Peridia was found in the Ahsoka show, or who knows, or they could be coming from planet Earth. And we're just seeing like a different version of Earth from a long time ago. So it would just be a long time ago. It'd be from a long time ago from this galaxy, not so far away. Yeah.
Doesn't have the same range.
It kind of lacks the poetic charm of the original thing. So, well, that's Skeleton Crew coming at us in a couple of weeks. And looking forward to getting together with everyone to discuss the episodes for the RFR Skeleton Crew Roundtable. They'll be happening on Wednesday nights throughout December. Well, for the first 3 weeks of December. Then the last week of December is Christmas week. So we'll be coming at you on the 26th, Thursday.
Yeah.
And then the
Boxing
following
Day.
week is Boxing Day. Indeed. We'll get in the ring and box. Over Skeleton Crew. And then we have the next week, which is, of course, New Year's. So we'll be coming at you on the 2nd, Thursday the 2nd, for that Skeleton Crew. And then we'll go back to Wednesdays for the next 2 weeks in January. And then that'll be it. The show will be over. So we'll see where this takes us. It takes us on an Amblin adventure like Goonies or Schindler's List or I don't know what.
Schindler's List.
I just love that. It is an Amblin movie. Come on now.
Right.
Rebel Force Radio.
For those of you who get accosted by family members, could be a spouse, saying, why do you listen to this Star Wars podcast? Those movies have been out for years. Is there anything new to talk about? Well, I'll tell you what, the reason we do this show, not just to cover new Star Wars, and like Skeleton Crew, there's always something new to discover. No matter how long you've been around, You can always learn something new. And I learned something new from Jim, this interview over at StarWars.com with Ian McKay, of course, the concept and storyboard artist of the Star Wars prequels. And he talked about an abandoned idea that they had for the Phantom Menace. I had never heard this before, and so I think this was a pretty big reveal. So what Ian says, for a time, the older Jedi was named Obi-Wan, he's talking about in the Phantom Menace, and the younger Jedi was named Qui-Gon. It was very poignant that at the end, as Obi-Wan dies and Qui-Gon defeats Darth Maul and stays with his master as he passes away, he not only takes on his master's quest, but he takes on his name. Qui-Gon becomes Obi-Wan. That's why when you see Alec Guinness in A New Hope, he puts his hood down and goes, Obi-Wan. Now that's a name I've not heard, because he's not heard Obi-Wan, he's Qui-Gon. And right at the end, George changed it. So this was obviously a George idea, and something that he abandoned, sounds to me, according to Ian McKay here, pretty late in the game.
That's because it's such a reach. I mean, it's really... He goes by Ben Kenobi. He's known as Ben Kenobi in the original film.
Mm-hmm.
Obi-Wan. Now, listen, I've heard Kenobi a lot because that's my last name. But Obi-Wan, that's a name I've not heard in a long time. My friends call me Qui-Gon. No, it just doesn't fit. I mean, it's a crazy, wild idea that could maybe work. But George was taking great liberties and having R2-D2 in scenes with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then he sees R2 in The New Hope. He's like, a droid. I have no idea. I just
don't remember owning a droid.
It's like, but I mean, it still works because Obi-Wan didn't actually own R2.
Right.
But he could have also said, oh, R2. Well, he's not mine, of course, but we shared many adventures together. No, nothing like that.
No.
That didn't happen.
No,
so,
but, okay, so what they're basically saying here is how old do we think, in this case, Qui-Gon, who becomes Obi-Wan, is? Let's put it in a practical, our world terms. How old do we think Obi-Wan is at the time of the Phantom Menace?
Like 29, 30 years old.
Okay, 29, 30 years old. Up to that point, he spent 29, 30 years being called Qui-Gon. Okay?
Yes.
He becomes Obi-Wan sort of as a homage to his fallen master. And he goes by Obi-Wan for a decade plus.
Yes.
And that's his name, Obi-Wan. I don't understand, like you were saying, what's the long time? If someone said Qui-Gon, I could understand him then saying, oh, that's a name I've not heard in a long time. But Obi-Wan, that's his name right now.
Right.
So I don't see the poignancy of it, really.
And then imagine having to answer to Yoda. Oh, Qui-Gon, you are now Obi-Wan then. Oh, it'd be like, he can take the name. Promise me you'll train the boy and change your name to Obi-Wan Kenobi, okay? Will you promise me? Be me. I want to live forever, but I can't, clearly, because Darth Maul stabbed me through the spine. But I could live forever if you pretend you're me. And if any of the other Jedi ask any questions, tell them to piss off.
Well, I interpret it, if this would have been the way, then I would have assumed that this is some sort of Jedi tradition, that this may not have been unique necessarily to Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, that when a master falls, maybe this is what you do so that their legacy can live on. It's real weird. It's real weird, though. I'm really glad that George changed his mind. What a mind screw, Jim, that would have been for us in the theaters in the spring of 1999 if we would have seen Liam Neeson at his age being called Obi-Wan in the film. We'd have been
Obi-Wan.
Like, what?
No, yeah, that might have worked. That might have worked. I think because to me, Obi-Wan Kenobi looks much older than the aged up Ewan McGregor. I mean, I think everybody in the Phantom Menace should have been about 10 years older than what they are. Like Obi-Wan should have been almost 40. Anakin should have been 20. I think that because it would have timed out better than with the original trilogy.
I agree with you there. But of course, so much was made about casting Ewan McGregor as a younger Alec Guinness. If he had been called Qui-Gon at the beginning of the movie, we'd have been like, what did we sign up for?
Well, they wouldn't have made any. They would have said that Liam Neeson is the young Alec Guinness.
Well, yeah, I suppose. Right.
Yeah, and you have a tough time making that add up. It's like, what?
Weird.
Obi-Wan Kenobi is Irish now? How did that happen?
My God, I can imagine Alec Guinness would be mortified. Stripping him.
Okay, well, this was Ian McCaig, okay? And he's a guy who was a big concept artist for the prequel films. As a matter of fact, I believe he's the guy who really locked down the look of Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. But this might be news to a lot of people, but to RFR listeners, this is old news.
Oh, come on.
Because, seriously. You gotta turn the clock back to 2013 when we were doing a commentary track for The Phantom Menace with special guest commentator Sam Witwer. And Sam talked about this concept as we were watching The Phantom Menace.
Qui-Gon Jinn is he's sort of this wonderful he's this key piece to everything.
Yes.
And he
well, I think that it was Roger Ebert that actually said to Liam Neeson, how does it feel to be playing John the Baptist?
Yes.
Which is a very appropriate analogy.
Well, and we always thought that was going to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. And frankly, it was going to be from a certain point of view. I'll tell the story. I may as well tell the story now. That an original idea was that Obi-Wan Kenobi was played by the Liam Neeson. He was the Liam Neeson character. And Qui-Gon Jinn was the Ewan McGregor character. And I will tell the conclusion of the story. Well, I'll tell it right now. Basically, that what happens is that, the same thing. Obi-Wan believes in Anakin. Qui-Gon doesn't really quite know what to make of it. He doesn't think that Obi-Wan is doing it right. All this stuff is happening. And then when Obi-Wan Kenobi, Liam Neeson, gets slain by Darth Maul, as a matter of loyalty, Qui-Gon Jinn becomes Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Very interesting.
And so when Luke said he was looking for Obi-Wan Kenobi, he goes, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Obi-Wan. And he's remembering his old master and remembering the mission he was charged with, to not just take care of this boy, but to be his old master. Which, of course, the Jedi knew he wasn't the original Obi-Wan Kenobi, but that was who he wanted to become. He wanted to be his master. And that idea is still in this film, that when we see Ewan McGregor in the next film, he looks like Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yes, that's true.
And he's starting to behave more like Qui-Gon Jinn.
All right, for anybody who would like it, this is the tin can that I was speaking in during that clip right here. I'll be auctioning this off later. I kept saying to Sam in this, this is going back 11 years, how interesting it was. It's so interesting, in fact, Sam, that I have no memory of this, but that's amazing that we were, obviously Rebel Force Radio at the forefront of this type of thing. I love that we were there before Ian McCaig, but I don't recall this being in any of the making of, like the the making of Phantom Menace, the book by Laurent Bouzereau. I don't recall that being something in there. So this might just be, up until this point, something, Sam's an insider and knew a lot of people at Lucasfilm, obviously, and he may have just could have heard it from Ian McCaig himself at one point. You never know.
Yeah, you never know with Sam's connections. But there it is, the switcheroo that almost happened, but thankfully never did. Because I think it was so convoluted. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, but I'm glad that George stuck with the original plan to have Obi-Wan be more or less an emerging character throughout the prequel trilogy. He's really not the guy who the spotlight is on in The Phantom Menace at all.
No.
He's way in the background when you compare him to the other leads, Qui-Gon, Padme, and
They
Kid
leave him there
Anakin.
working on the ship while they go have that adventure and the pod race and all of that. Obi-Wan is nowhere to be found.
Right, he's at the gas station fueling up the Nubian cruiser.
They didn't even get him tickets to the damned pod race.
No, he didn't even go. They didn't even call him to say, hey, we met this kid, okay? And he's mad crazy at this pod racing thing, and there's a race. And listen, you think we got good tickets? We are in the pit, my friend. You got to get into town for this. This is going to be a huge blowout. Well, I don't know. I have to clean the dead insects off the Nubian cruiser windshield. Just get over here, will you? No, he's that one friend. You can never get him to go out to do it. No, I'm just going to stay here and watch the telly. Okay, so there is Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon switcheroo. Well, and in more Obi-Wan news, Jason.
Yes.
We have some highlights from a recent interview he did with the Awards Chatter podcast. And, of course, the prequels were talked about. And, of course, Ewan and his struggle to accept his role in Star Wars, you know? I mean, we knew he was very enthusiastic about playing Obi-Wan and everything, but by the time Revenge of the Sith came and went, I think Ewan was wiped out from Star Wars. I think he wanted to go on back to his more experimental filmmaking, his indie films, and occasional big Hollywood productions, but he didn't want to commit to something as intense as the Star Wars prequels were. He wanted to get back to roots, so he sort of left Star Wars in the dust for a while. But he came back around, and he talks in this interview about the moment he really started to realize that the prequels were really loved by the younger fans of Star Wars, fans who were young when the prequels were coming out.
I'd never went to a Comic-Con. I'd never been to a convention, a Star Wars convention. I just hadn't done it, partly because after they came out and weren't liked, I just sort of put the blinkers on and got on with my career and did other things and didn't give it much more thought, really. And then when we did the series, obviously I had to revisit the whole Star Wars world, by which time they'd made the sequels. I watched them. I watched the original films again. I remembered how much I loved them when I was a kid. I watched ours and I was like, oh, they're not too bad, you know. And I watched some of the cartoons that have been done. Anyway, I sort of sank myself into the world again. And when we made this, I enjoyed playing him a lot. Deb Chow, who directed them, is a fantastic director, and I loved working with her. And when we released them at the Comic-Con, at this huge Star Wars convention in Anaheim. It was only a convention for Star Wars, and they played the first 2 episodes at this convention with Star Wars fans, and it was unbelievable to watch with these people. Unbelievable. And because I was there, and it was a convention, and they asked me to do some autographs and take pictures with fans, something I'd never done, I thought, well, I'm going to do it. I'll just do it because I'm there, and I should see what it's like. And because I've done that, I've met the fans, and I've met the people, and I must have talked about it because so many people from that generation who were kids come up to me, and the first thing they say is that your Star Wars are our Star Wars. They're our Star Wars. And you know, you made my childhood, and all these lovely things that people say. And as a result of it all, I've realized that they were much loved by the people who really we made them for. They're films for young people, you know.
Yeah. Every time I hear you and talk about that, I'm just so appreciative of
that generation of fans that were able to get through, because in so many ways, Jim, our generation, we couldn't see past some of these things. We couldn't see past the stories that we'd made up in our heads. But you take these kids that were 9, 10, 11 years old when in 1999, that's their Star Wars. He's their, Han Solo or Luke Skywalker, whatever, analogous connection you want to draw. And so I'm really, really grateful that generation of fans kind of made up. Now, I loved the Star Wars prequels. We were talking off air about how, excited I was in between each one, couldn't wait and all of that. But as a generation, we kind of, in some ways, sort of let them down a little bit, I think. And maybe we're a little too, as a generation again, a little too harsh, a little too hard. I'm just really glad that younger generation was there to sort of bridge the gap and let guys like Hayden and Ewan know how much they really are loved by Star Wars fans.
When I hear the younger generation say, well, that's our Star Wars and everything, I don't think they're saying it's better than the original trilogy.
Right.
I don't think that's what they're saying, nor do I think they're saying we connect more with the prequels than we do the originals. Even though George Lucas himself believed that, the younger kids who were around when films like The Phantom Menace came out, they would look at that and just be blown away because the special effects were so intense. But then you pop in the VHS of the original film or even Empire or Jedi, some kids will look at that and go, that looks so old,
Yeah.
And it's easier for us older fans to look at that as the gold standard. But I think the younger fans who think the prequels are their Star Wars are just as appreciative of the original trilogy and everything the original trilogy has to offer, from story to characters to even, yes, dusty old special effects from the 70s. Which George did correct with the special editions and all that.
Yeah.
But still, there's only so much you can do without creating a whole different film.
Yeah.
But I think what they're saying when they say it's ours is because they were there for it. They had boots on the ground. They were lining up at the theaters. They were enjoying all the merch and the conversation with their friends and the anticipation and the speculation and all of that. They were there for it. And it was massively successful, I think, in that regard, as far as creating the next generation of Star Wars fans. Do the sequels have those kind of legs? I don't know, but a whole generation of fans sure were happy that they were able to be there for it. But
billions
it just
of dollars
like
were made. That's a lot of ticket sales, no matter how you slice it. So there's a lot of kids that saw those films. We don't know what the impact is going to be or is. I can relate to this just on a small level. Some of the things that I've said to you over the years was Jabba's palace was my cantina. Darth Vader coming down the ramp of the Imperial shuttle at the beginning. That was my Darth Vader coming through the Tantive 4 moment for those that were able to see Episode 4 in the theaters. So I could say the same thing. Jedi is my Star Wars movie, but it doesn't mean that I don't adore the ones that came before it. I realize that Jedi stands on the shoulders of these other films, obviously. But as far as being there and having that experience that you and others talk about, seeing the original, that's how we kind of make that connection and relate.
For sure. Well, Ewan himself had a connection to the original. And as a prequel kid himself, well, not really, but I mean, as far as acting goes, he's the prequel generation.
Yeah.
And obviously too young to have been acting in the original Star Wars. So, Ewan should be saying, hey, it's my Star Wars too, really, when you get to get down to brass tacks. But he talks about his connection to the original trilogy via his Uncle Wedge Antilles, Dennis Lawson, who is famously Ewan McGregor's uncle. And he reveals that, and I've never heard this story before. I don't think I have. And there's a reason why I haven't heard it. And you'll figure that out when you hear the clip. But it appears that Uncle Dennis was not really too enthusiastic about Ewan being in Star Wars and even told him not to do it.
He did say don't do it, yeah. He just said, don't do it. If you want a career after 30, don't do it, he said. Dennis was like, he played Wedge Antilles. In the first Star Wars film, when they're approaching the Death Star, he says, look at the size of that thing. That's him. That's my uncle. And I think for him, it was just like an odd, like all the British actors in his day were in it, and they did like a few days here and there, and they sat in a cockpit and they did and he just felt like he didn't understand quite the a lot of other actors in that film, like Alec Guinness, for instance, didn't understand, why it had such a draw, really. Or where, so for him and all but now Dennis is doing the conventions with me, we're signing autographs, so he doesn't like me telling the story anymore.
Yeah, he's still cashing in, so don't rock that boat. Don't rock that boat with your wacky recollections on the interview circuit. So that's Ewan McGregor on Awards Channel.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Awards Chatter.
Yeah.
Chatter. It's a podcast, I believe, produced by The Hollywood Reporter. Awards Chatter.
All right.
Not Yaddle Chattel.
That's a
Awards
whole different
Chatter.
So I tell you what, it's probably 10 times as entertaining as Award Chatter.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, so this John Williams documentary, which I have not finished yet, I started it, is one of the things that Disney Plus has been doing right is these incredible documentary series. They're making incredible stuff, and it seems only fitting. I was actually thinking, gosh, I don't know, other than maybe an old A&E biography in the 90s, have I ever seen a documentary specifically about John Williams. So it's about time we get it. And Jim, I'm guessing by the clips here that you've seen the whole thing, you've watched it all, and
yeah, I watched the whole thing. And they do spend ample time on Star Wars. But then they talk about other things like Raiders of the Lost Ark and Schindler's List and all of this other stuff.
Yeah,
I just want the Star Wars. So, I mean, let me just say, it's a great watch all the way through. But I would prefer actually a full documentary on John's work on the Star Wars film.
Oh.
But yeah,
enough
I think that would be great.
To fill a documentary just on
I think
composing
there
those.
could be enough to fill a documentary. But they present us with some great nuggets here in the Music by John Williams documentary. And we'll start with the original Star Wars, go back to the mid-'70s. And John Williams and George Lucas in this clip talk about the Star Wars main theme.
I worked for quite a number of weeks, never knowing what to do for the beginning of the film. I think the very last thing I wrote was the opening fanfare and the brass march theme.
The first time I heard parts of it was Johnny played it for me on the piano, which is, all it is a rough piano rendition of the themes. And so you have to say, well, I guess I don't know, but it sounds good to me. But it doesn't have any of the energy or the emotion or anything that when you have a full orchestra playing it.
We decided we needed to have a symphony orchestra to do this, which I never had before in a film. And Lionel Newman said, we'll hire the London Symphony Orchestra. What a turn on, what a blast, what an exciting turn of events. We would go over to London and hire this world-class orchestra to realize my score and perform it.
It's hard to describe unless you've been through it, but it's sort of like having a baby. That is the only way I can really describe hearing the score for the first time. And for me, I hadn't heard it with an orchestra or anything, and I hadn't heard it with the picture. I trusted John, I trusted Stephen, but there's always that moment where they play the first cue and you're terrified it's not going to work.
Did I detect a little emotion in George? Does he get a little choked up in that? Or he
No, I don't think so.
What was I thinking?
I didn't. He starts tearing up. I just love John Williams so much. No, that didn't happen.
Oh,
but I like just putting myself in their perspective and trying to think of what it would be like to sit there. And John Williams says, all right, I'm going to play for you now the main theme. And John sits behind his piano and just starts playing it. He's like, this is just a sketch. That's what he would always call it. Because in John's head, he's hearing the full orchestra.
Sure.
But here he is just playing it on a piano, just laying down the notes. So George and whoever his collaborator is can hear it. And man, that would be great to have an album of John Williams playing the Star Wars music on a piano, just unaccompanied.
Sketches. Star Wars musical sketches.
Yes, from John Williams. And, you know, at his age, he's still tickling the ivories. God bless him. You know, a lot of guys, they get taken down by arthritis and who knows what. But carpal tunnel, he's still playing. You know, good for him.
And he seems just really, really sharp too, like his recall and everything. You know, I don't know that I feel like when you go back and you see these clips of John Williams when he was much younger, he was never exactly, you know, bouncing off the walls. He's always been a fairly reserved type guy. So, you know, it seems like he's got the same energy level as he did back in the 1970s.
Yeah, he's still active, still working, and that's probably what keeps him fresh.
Right.
And so Star Wars becomes a big success, and now they start talking about sequels. And Williams wasn't really in love with the idea of working on sequels, but he always did for a very specific reason. And I think that reason is continuity. He takes pride in his work. And if the stories are going to be continued, he wants to apply his music underneath it. So here's John Williams talking about, this is also George Lucas on this clip too, talking about sequels.
I have to say that I've never been entirely comfortable with doing sequels. I would rather have done a fresh story with a fresh opportunity for a fresh score. But Star Wars, for example, and Indiana Jones particularly, I just felt that I didn't want some other composer, very frankly, to come in and change that. That it was something that I would have, if I could do it, to preserve the integrity of that piece, if I could have the time and energy to do all that. Particularly in the case of Star Wars, where I did the first 9, I'll use the word jealous of keeping the integrity of what I've already done. Not that I thought that it was so precious or so timeless that it couldn't be touched by another composer, but I felt that if I could keep it consistent with my own work, that would be the best thing to do.
I'm not sure I would have done episodes 1, 2, and 3 if I couldn't have gotten Johnny to do the music for it. You know, because he was such an integral part of the creative process.
Thank God for John Williams, because whether it be different directors, different, a different tone, you look at the sequel trilogy, the prequel trilogy, original trilogy, we always have that home base to find ourselves, to ground ourselves in the Star Wars universe when it's a John Williams score. We have that to hold on to. It's so important. I can see why George made that claim about John being a major factor in his decision to do more Star Wars.
Yeah, and just to reinforce that, we around here, Rebel Force Radio, coined the phrase Star Wars oxygen when describing the soundtracks John Williams provides for the films. It's basically the oxygen of the cinematic stories. So you heard George mention there that he wouldn't even thought of doing the prequels unless it was for knowing that he had John Williams at his disposal.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I think George can say that now in 2024, but I don't believe that to be fact. I think George would have, if he had the idea for the prequels and really wanted to get it out there, John Williams was unavailable, George would have plowed ahead with those films. So I think he's blowing smoke when he says that. And also,
nice
it disappoints. It's a nice thing to say. It disappoints me that that's the only mention of the Star Wars prequels in the entire documentary.
Really?
I thought Duel of the Fates was worth at least a couple of minutes, but that's why I'd like to see a Star Wars music documentary. about the music that the soundtracks John Williams provided to those films, because I think there's a lot of digging deep you can go into that stuff and do so in a documentary form with John Williams and take advantage of him still being around. But maybe he's a one and done kind of guy when it comes to documentaries. He doesn't want to do another one. So you heard what he said about sequels. So.
Right.
Maybe he's not down with him. And also, the whole idea of him wanting to continue the films because he didn't want to let it go. Basically, I said it was continuity. John says it's integrity. The integrity of his work is at stake anytime somebody new comes in to take over.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very protective of that. A good example was I remember him making statements after The Force Awakens came out and production started ramping up on The Last Jedi, and the question was asked to him, are you going to score the other two films of the trilogy? And he said, yeah, because I don't want anybody else writing music for Daisy. Remember, he said that countless numbers of times.
We laughed. We thought maybe he had a little crush.
Yeah, I think so. So he doesn't really address that in the documentary, but Rey's theme does become a topic in the documentary as they talk about the return of Star Wars via the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And in this clip, we're going to hear from Seth MacFarlane, who is a talking head throughout this thing, John Williams himself, and J.J. Abrams.
When The Force Awakens came out, it's not like John changed his style. He didn't. He wrote the same way he would have written in the 70s.
And
he's never lost the honest curiosity. He somehow is able to tap into this unbelievably resonant emotional truth, but then he's confident enough to be vulnerable and then to ask, is that all right? What do you think? I'm not, and he's literally asking you, do you think this is okay? And it makes me laugh because when John Williams plays you a piece of music that he's written and he asks you if it's okay, there is one answer.
Who are you to say, no, try again?
Yeah, right. I wonder if anyone
Get
really has.
serious, Williams.
I don't know. We really need to take this back to the woodshed, John. You're missing it by a mile. Does anyone ever do that? Does anyone ever do? You're really not capturing what we're trying. No, it's just like you've hired John Williams.
It's in this documentary, or I've seen it in other places, where Spielberg has a very similar reaction to hearing John plunk things out on a piano as George did with the Jaws theme. It was like, I don't know, but in both cases, I think they had trust. There was trust that it was gonna turn out to be something great, even if they were like didn't sound great on the piano.
For sure. And speaking of the piano, we did hear John Williams himself playing Rey's theme in that last clip. So, yeah, give us an album, John. Why not? Just we could record it at your house. I'll come over and record it for you, for crying out loud. If you need somebody, I'm offering my services free of charge.
Mac will bring the gear,
we'll make it
hook it up, mix it.
It'll be an RFR exclusive. John Williams Unplugged. I would love it. So that's the John Williams doc. It's currently airing on Disney Plus. I recommend it as a fan of John Williams, and who listening to the show is not a fan of John Williams? Check it out. I think you'll like it a lot.
You think there's somebody listening to the show, though, that is saying, I love Star Wars. I've been a fan. I've loved it my whole life, except for that damn music.
Yeah, really
blows. Is there somebody out there?
Could there be? Yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but the music, forget about it. No.
Jim, not long ago, we were talking about the revelation that the famous high ground scene in Episode 3 was Steven Spielberg's idea. It was something that Spielberg came up with, and crew and people around George at the time, including Nick Gillard, the stunt choreographer, for the prequels, just didn't like it. But it stuck. And not only has it stuck, but it's become a meme. The high ground has become a thing.
Do you think Steven wrote that? I have the high ground. That can be attributed to Steven Spielberg.
Just the whole,
or just the
I don't
battle
know about
sequence.
the writing, as much as them making a big deal of the fact that he had the high ground.
I had heard George Lucas talk about Steven Spielberg, about how Steven likes to cut things on a laptop computer by his swimming pool. So he's just hanging around the house, outside. He's probably under a table with an umbrella, and he's got his laptop there. He's banging out the Mustafar fights, working on the animatics for that or whatever he does. And when George said that, he was like, yeah, Steven likes to, work on it while he's sitting on a swimming pool. Like Steven's just a nut, Like George could never, ever imagine doing something like that.
Yeah.
George would have to be in a office or a studio.
Yeah, you can't enjoy yourself when you're doing those types of things. It's drudgery.
That's what it is. But Steven, he's a filmmaker in his soul to his core. And he developed the entire battle sequence there, the Mustafar battle. And we talked about it before, about the silliness of the high ground line. For those of you who need a refresher, we have the audio.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
So the high ground, famous line, what does it mean? What, a Jedi can't attack another Jedi because he's up a little higher than, if the Jedi comes at me, I jump on a table. It's over,
Yeah, that's all you need to do.
Once you get that high ground,
it just felt to me
safe.
like it was some sort of antiquated war battle strategy, like the redcoats and the British or the British and the Americans firing at each other, right across, from a little chasm. It just seemed like a silly way of engaging in battle, and that this was sort of the Jedi sort of version of that in some way, but.
The high ground. So Hayden Christensen appeared at SpaceCon San Antonio recently. He was up on stage doing a panel with Rosario Dawson, not bad company. And someone from the crowd yelled out at Hayden, why did Anakin make the jump, knowing that Obi-Wan had the high ground? I mean, why would then Anakin be so foolish to attempt to defeat someone who already had the high ground? It's impossible, as we know, in the Star Wars universe. So our buddy, the Legacy of Nerd, was there, and he was shooting video. And so we have a clip from that panel of Hayden Christensen explaining why Anakin Skywalker made the jump.
Why did I jump? Arrogance of youth, and I also like to think that there was like this sort of, lore within the Jedi, that when Obi-Wan defeated Darth Maul had the high ground, and he did this amazing flip, and so I like to think that they talked about that, and it was like this, big deal. And so like Anakin, in the back of his head, he hears Obi-Wan say like, I have the high ground. He's like, I'm gonna show him. It just didn't play out the way he had hoped.
And now we know.
And now we know.
So it's canon right there. If they say it at a convention, it's canon.
So we interpret it as this. Obi-Wan defeated Darth Maul, even though Darth Maul had the high ground.
Yes.
So he told this to Anakin. And when he told this to Anakin, he said, it's impossible as a Jedi to defeat someone who has the high ground, unless you're me, this guy. And so Anakin heard this. He goes, okay, master. And he said, well, listen, whatever you do, don't use me as an example. Never. Whatever you do, no matter what's happening in the heat of battle, if someone has the high ground, never, ever make an attempt to try to continue the duel because it's over. And Anakin's, okay, Master, but you defeated Darth Vader. No, Anakin, no. I said, don't use me as an example.
Right.
You'll get yourself killed. Trust me, especially on lava planets, dude. Especially on lava. Maybe Obi-Wan had like a vision of the future. He's like, oh, that doesn't look good. Oh, I got to start BSing Anakin at an early age so he doesn't try to make that jump. They're not going to call him Anakin anymore. He'll be known as Matt because he's going to be a floor mat sitting there on the shores of lava on planet Mustafar. So that's how we break all that down.
Mhm.
That's how we interpret
According
that.
to Hayden,
That's-
yeah.
According to Hayden.
It's the best theory I've heard.
So now we've turned all canon over to Hayden Christensen. So whenever like they have a question on the set of a streaming series, it's like, should these bikes have tassels on them? You have to call Hayden Christensen. Yeah, let's call Hayden. He'll know the answer. He's like Mikey from the Life cereal commercials. Let's call Hayden. He hates everything. What? We can keep the tassels? He likes it. Hey, Hayden. Okay. So that's the high ground. To leave you with a little chuckle on our way out, here's Robot Chicken's take on that famous high ground scene.
It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground.
You underestimate my power.
Don't try it. High ground. You were supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. High ground.
I hate you.
You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you. High ground. Ah! Whoops, I'm gonna grab that there. High ground.
Wait, are you f***ing robbing me?
I'll give it to your son someday if Padme isn't, dead. I mean, she looked pretty dead to me from up here on the high ground.
Wait. I'm literally just cooking to death. Please, just kill me.
That's not the high ground way. I mean, the Jedi way. You know what I'm saying. I'm saying I've beaten you and I'm on the high ground, so. High ground.
Oh, there's such a freshness. Such a freshness to that stuff when Robot Chicken was doing it before it was, maybe overplayed and things like that. Robot Chicken was so good at that stuff.
Yes, indeedy. I think they own it. I think they are still they're still on the high ground of high ground humor.
Yeah.
High ground.